All right, this game just happened, but I was doing other stuff, so I recorded in the background, and we're gonna look at it now. It looked like a very interesting game, and the first thing I want to talk about, because I glanced and saw this first move. So Deli starts in 7, and Akiyama replies in 4. And this is a kind of move I don't consider at all. But it is the kind of move that the solver is regularly like, oh, you could have just chucked this card next to their starter, not capturing it, not that they don't have lock-ins, and it's just a tie. It's fine. It's one of the better moves. And you'll even see this in positions where there aren't very many ways to tie. You'll see this in positions where like out of 40 possible moves for second turn, like 10 or fewer tie. And one of those ties is just some random card next to the starter that doesn't achieve obvious things. It's not safe, it can be captured multiple ways, the card in the corner can be locked in. The kind of stuff I tend to think about in a move is not followed at all by this, but the moves can be completely fine. I have no strong reason to believe this is a poor move or anything. Um, But when you see a move by a strong player that is a move you would not just never play, but like never consider, it's worth thinking about what could get you there. And I think this is more in chess, but I think people go really astray in their explanations for moves, which is to say, they see a move, they come up with a reason it could be played, and they go, ah, yes, this move controls the center. But there were lots of moves available that control the center. This doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't actually tell you as much as you think it does. You have given an explanation for this move, but it fails to differentiate this move from others. You never even think, does it differentiate the move from others? You have just come up with some kind of explanation, and you have not kind of thought about, would it lead you to this move before the move, right? If you want to be able to find and consider moves of a type, you need something that can lead you there. Explanatory stuff is not necessarily predictive stuff. You want something, tools that can lead you to a move, not tools that once a move is played, you can go, ah, yes, this makes sense to me. Because actually, the conclusions you draw have very serious selection bias, and it's just really easy to lead yourself into sloppy and bad thinking. Um, but it is what we naturally do. We see something and we try to come up with explanations for it. Something more useful to do, I think, is to kind of think in terms of what are thoughts that could lead me here, not what are thoughts that explain that this happened, right? If someone makes a move and I give the explanation in chess, it develops a piece. But there were 6 other moves that developed a piece, right? That doesn't tell you, and I stress this when teaching chess a lot, why this now, right? Saying it develops a piece gives a why, but it does not say why this, right? It doesn't answer why this move that does that over the other moves. And then the now is a question of urgency and what the kind of immediate relevancy of this move is. And I think if you answer why this now, you will get a pretty decent explanation for a move. But often, if you're not strong enough to understand the move, it doesn't necessarily help you understand it if the understanding isn't already within your kind of realm of comprehension. Um, because you might not be able to fill in the why, the this, or the now. But it is to say, like, after this move is played, I can sort of look at it and be like, okay, maybe Deli has really clunky options in 8. Maybe he doesn't have great options in 1. Um, Maybe this blocks some counterplay. Like, we could start coming up with reasons. And those reasons might all be true. And I think there was a comment on a very early video I made where Deli played a game I thought was really good, and someone said like he only made one clever move, right? How interesting is this? And first of all, like a lot of his moves were fairly normal, but they were like good moves, and you know. Deli's normal looking move is often much better justified than, any other player's normal looking move kind of thing. But second of all, I think this is just sort of the wrong approach to thinking, I guess is what I want to say. Is that like, if I see something unusual, or if I see usual moves, right? Sometimes that means I'm going to brush past them because because I'm, talking about a lot of moves. But if I want to like learn from it and get better, if it's not the very first instinct I had, it's worth like taking a moment and being like, what gets me to this move over and above these other moves that appeal to me, right? If there are three or four different moves that appeal to me and one of them is clearly better, well, something's happening there. Something worth figuring out. All right, I think I'm losing the thread of what I wanted to say a bit, but when I see a move like this move in four, I wonder not just like, it's not just like, why is the move made? It's what thinking could lead you to this move. And to my eyes, so we can start like thinking a little about the move. So the first question it brings up is what happens if Deli blocks 8? And I think we can see pretty quickly there are some problems if Deli wants to block 8. 5727 is comboed two different ways, by 7538 and by 7825 from 9. There is no combo back, and that combo will flip 7, and there's no combo back because 4 isn't strong to 7. Similarly, 7358 can be comboed by 8148, which is safe, and there is no combo back on that. So we're left with two cards. 4818, there is no immediate combo. Is there a setup? Ooh, 1687 and 6. I mean, you'd have to calculate that a little further if you're playing it in the game, but that actually just looks like you might not even have to. The one worry for Akiyama is you're getting rid of all of your down power, but you have set up 8148 to be so dominant in 4 and 9, 5 and 9, that it's kind of hard to imagine you're not doing well. Also, the one facing up from 6 is kind of nice, because if you ever need to reflip that, that's easy to do. Yeah, I mean, that looks very promising, to say the least, right? So you have serious threats against 3 cards, so there's also 6385, but 6385 gives up all your down power. And so if 6385 goes in 8, then say 8148 goes in 9. Sure, Deli locked in 7, but Akiyama has 8 and 9, and they're pretty untouchable. No, 9 is covered. So you don't play 8148, you play a 7 up. Sorry, I missed the 7358 covering 8s. So you take it with one of the cards with a 7 up, and you have locked in 2 cards to Deli's 1. So, like, it doesn't take that much looking to figure out that this is, like, a promising idea, right? That it at least makes it difficult to go in 8. But how do you get here, right? We've given a why. We've given Deli's the obvious square Deli wants to go. If we think in terms of kind of key squares, in this setup, like the standard thing to do is go 8, the next most common thing to do is go 1, and the next most common thing is to go 2. That's not to say there aren't moves in other squares, but those are the 3 most common squares, and most moves, and most good moves, will be found within those 3 squares. There are possibilities to play in other squares, and, sometimes they're correct and better, but you're not hindering yourself that much if you only ever play an 8-1 or 2 here. Now, because there is no combo chain between 4 and 7, 2 doesn't really set anything up. So I'm just saying you wouldn't go that astray if you only ever play 8 and 1 here, which means when you go 4, and specifically when you go 4 not capturing 7, you really just need to be prepared against 8 and 1, and if you can handle those 2 moves well, you often have a very promising position. Here, we have seen there is very promising coverage of 8, and so the next question is what happens if Deli goes 1? A lot of his moves there you can probably just capture. And so 4818 in 1 seems to me like the critical move, for whatever that's worth. Then Akiyama has options in 5. Akiyama notably likes to play 5 in these positions where there's the 3 cards on the side of the board, but 8 seems more likely. Though Deli actually has pretty decent play if Akiyama goes 8. Like, they both have nice play against the other person going 8. Right? 1687, there's potential combo in 5. You might not be able to take it immediately because 8148 lands in 9, but you might be able to because blank covers that landing in 9. I complained last video that I kept saying right after sentences. I'm doing it again. God, I hate when I pick up vocal tics from things I'm listening to that I don't like the vocal tics of, and then I start having the same vocal tics. Very frustrating. Alright, so, see, I'm fine saying alright. Alright is a very different kind of thing to say at the end of a sentence. It's not like asking for confirmation that I don't need in the way that asking right is. Okay, not important. Sorry to get bogged down in my insecurities and whatnot. So, it's not necessarily easy for Akiyama to go in 8 either. 7538 is a capture, but that's comboed back by blank. There is a potential combo back there, but you can see there's complexity to the play. The only card that can land in 8 and take 7 without risking combo back looks like it's 8148, but that 8 facing up is a very big number, and maybe Delial can play a 9 there and lock in the card in 8. So maybe 4818 and 1 is interesting. I'm not sure. Let's return for a sec to this move in 4. Because we've come up with reasons for why you'd make it, but not sort of reasons for how you get here. And I think how you get here, and this may just not be his thinking at all, because one thing you'll find is people are immediately drawn to different ideas, obviously, and sometimes there's not like a logically rigorous way to get to their thinking, which is not to say that their thinking isn't like logical or rigorous. It's to say, from whatever baseline thoughts you have, the logic that would get you to considering this move is going to happen far enough down the road. You're just not going to get there in 3 or 5 minutes, right? You're going to have other moves to consider first. But I think the thinking probably looks something like this. Delial has played a corner starter. Corner starters should be attacked, right? Corner starters can be pressured. We can take them, forcing action, or we can play next to them, forcing action anyway, because now we threaten to take and lock them in. When doing this, we should think about what cards can they play next to their starter? What cards can they use to lock it in? If we were going to take the starter from 8 and force them to recapture from 4, they would only have 6385 to do so. So if we can take an 8 in a way that sets up against 6385, gives us play against that, that might be very promising. Let's say you look at that and conclude, I don't have a way to set that up, right? Okay, well, let's consider going in 4 and forcing them to play 8. Now, here we might easily stop thinking because we might notice they have 3 different recaptures in 8. That's a lot. But let's say we kept thinking. We might notice 5727 we have play against. We can combo that. 7358 we have play against. We can combo that. They only have 1 card left that can go in 8 that we can't combo. 4818. Okay, well, if we can force 4818 out of there into that square, we could either play in 4 in such a way that it sets up 5 against 4818, and you look at the hand and you conclude, okay, the only move that does so is 7825, or maybe we have a big setup in 6, and as we saw, we have the big setup in 6. But this does make me wonder, would a 7825 and 4 have been a better move? The answer is probably no, because that gives Deli something he can attack, and if he takes, it's likely to be locked in, while 7447 is very unlikely to be locked in. But I'm not sure, just an idea. Marlborough in 4 also seems kind of plausible via this train of thinking. But if I have all those controlled, then going in 4 forces the action in a nice way. But the card I want to put in 4, capturing, forcing them to capture back, is 1687, and I need to hold on to that because 1687 is critical to my punishing of 4818. So I know I need to hold on to 8148, that covers a lot. I know I need to hold on to 1687. I know I need to hold on to something that hits a 7, but all of 7447, 7538, and 7825, they all hit 7s, facing to the right from 8. So not obvious which card should go in 4, but we can start to see how you might get here, right? If you are really focused in on what are the ways my opponent can build out from their corner, and how can I attack those ways? Um, and maybe that gets you here. Maybe it doesn't. But we're trying to think of thinking that helps you start to identify this move over other moves and how you'd get here within like a fairly short time span, right? Did it again. Where if there's 8, 10, 12 plausible moves, takes a while to think through each of them. How do you have this high enough on your priority list that you actually do consider it sufficiently? Okay, let's move on in the game. We spent a long time on this position, but I hope it was an interesting digression. Okay. Deli goes in 3. So I talked about how most moves are in 8, 1, or 2, in generally that order, and here 2 didn't make much sense, so 8 or 1. But we did sort of get to something that relates to this, which is because this is a type of move I do sometimes play, though not very often. But when I play, it seems relevant to this. It's when I don't love how I can interact with the cards in 4 and 7, but I don't think my opponent can interact very well either. And we did notice when considering 4, 8, 1, 8, and 1 that Akiyama doesn't necessarily have very good cards to stick in 8. And so this is the move that interacts least with the board. Deli is saying, okay, I'm going to play 4, 8, 1, 8, and 3. I can recapture this 2 different ways. And I don't think you have good cards to put in 8, and I don't think you have good cards to put in 1. Notice that Deli has now covered 1, such that Akiyama doesn't have safety there. Right? With cards in 4 and 7, the key squares tend to be 8 and 1, and Deli is saying, you don't have play in either of them. Another key square can be 2, but again, the combo chain doesn't work the way that favors 2. In a lot of positions with cards in these squares, my favorite square here would be 2. There have been a lot of videos where I've argued for going in, it can be rotated, but a version of 2 here. But the combo chain almost always has to be going the other way, where 4 is strong to 7. Not almost always, but fairly frequently. My instinct would not be to look 2 here. So Akiyama said, you don't have a good way to play 8 or 1, and Deli says, you don't have a good way to play 8 or 1. And the way I tend to get to this kind of move is just very much that train of thought, right? This is how I'm used to eventually getting on this type of move. I think I have one recorded game with this type of move played, and it was against Deli, and we ended up tying that game. But my idea is I'm looking at 8 and 1. I notice it's really uncomfortable for me to go in those squares, but I also start noticing it's uncomfortable for you to go in those squares. For instance, when I look at 1, I notice Akiyama doesn't have a great move in 8, right? I did it again. So, and when Akiyama doesn't have a good move to put in 8, suddenly 1 starts seeing, or something distant starts seeming more appealing because I have realized neither of us want to interact with this board. I'm not sure Deli is right here, but it makes sense to say these have some slightly low numbers facing out, and there's not a clean way to interact with it. I'm going to play a card that I can interact cleanly with and comfortably that helps me cover 1, though I guess 5727 already had 1 covered, but a card that is easy for me to interact with, maybe creates some difficulty for you, right? Akiyama doesn't have 2. I did it again, I know. And that we sort of leave open the question of how we're going to interact with those initial cards. So I'm not going to spend the time to start trying to figure out the potential endgames from here, but let's instead sort of say, what are the default moves? Which we kind of did with Deli, right? And Deli ended up not playing the default moves, and Akiyama may well not either, right? His move in, I did it again. His move in 4 was not following sort of standard protocol, right? Oh, God. I gotta give up speaking. It's over. It's so frustrating when your vocal tics annoy yourself. It's just so difficult. Okay. So, but every time I do it, I'm gonna like yell at myself and hope that that gets me to somewhere where I speak the way I intend to speak. That said, Akiyama should consider 8, but it can be hard to go in 8. 7538 is in fact covered two ways by 7358, among other things. 8148 is a card that's difficult to recapture if needed. So 8 certainly could be a reasonable square. 1687 is potentially comboed by 6385 and 5, and you do have the combo back with 8148, but that is comboed back by 7358. So you could easily conclude it's difficult to go in 8. 1 is simply not going to be safe, so you really have to figure out that endgame well. You have to be like, okay, if I go Malboro in 1 and they play 5-7-2-7 and 2, you really need to have seen a move at distance there, and that's going to be a difficult position. Deli has pretty good cards. He doesn't have much right power, so maybe you can figure something out, but it seems very likely to be clunky, and you have to find a very specific line. I think Metis is probably, and maybe it's just Seto because it's often just Seto, but I think Metis is really good at finding those kind of continuations. Maybe Stuff as well. Stuff did a really nice job in Triad Wars of like, here's a move that concedes something, but at least it forces us into a specific endgame. And if I calculate something in that endgame, if I can find the one move that ties there, then I have found my tie. And it is better to play this move that forces specific action that gets me to that tie than to play a vague move I have not fully calculated that in general seems more promising, but may easily lose. I'm curious to see what Akiyama does here. Akiyama goes 9. Okay, so this is very much continuing the whole trend of I don't think it's comfortable to touch the action. And actually, one thing interesting about both Deli's and Akiyama's moves is both of these moves may have been moves they had in mind on previous turns, right? I did it again. 4818 is a move that. Sorry, this video is just me saying I did it again after saying a word. But 4818 in 3 is a move Deli may well have considered as a starter. It's something he can recapture, it's something he can work around. He went for something else, but it was probably an idea he had in mind, and thus it made it more familiar to him to think about later. 7538 in 9 is something Akiyama has the nice recapture if needed, with 8148 and 6. And again, may have been something he was considering at distance. One thing I note is the reason he probably didn't play it earlier is it can potentially be comboed by 6385 and 6. And I assume his idea is to combo back with 1687 and 5. It can be taken, I mean, with 1687 and 5 because he doesn't actually have a recapture on 9, which is why you wouldn't play 9 earlier, but an idea you might have had floating in your head and ready to come out. These positions are pretty complicated. I tend to be skeptical of the kind of 3-4-7-9 type setups for second turn specifically. Even when they set up a lot, which is not super obvious this does, and removing 9 is such an important square to remove because the reason not to go in 8 so frequently was because of responses in 9. So going in 9 really makes me think 8 is likely critical. But it doesn't have to be. Like 6, 3, 8, 5, and 6 is a really critical move to consider. It looks like it doesn't work. It looks like 1, 6, 8, 7, and 5 is a good response. No, it doesn't. What am I talking about? 1, 6, 8, 7, 5, you can play blank in 8. And you combo everything, and there's no combo back. I must be missing something obvious, but why isn't 6, 3, 8, 5, and 6 a good move. But this is the thing about these moves in 9, is there's so many potential things that can be annoying. One or two can be strong. There was the game between Stuff and Turds where I believe they had this type of structure, and I think Turds was winning, and I didn't find the win, and Turds didn't find the win, and Stuff didn't find the win. Like, no one, I think no one saw the win. I might be remembering wrong. Maybe it wasn't a win, but I think it was. And I think the move was in the equivalent of 8. 8 tends to be the best square. But 8, for whatever reason, it wasn't obvious it worked, and we all sort of skimmed past it to other things. But there were so many dangerous options. 1, 2, 6, even 5 sometimes can be devastating. There's a great game. It's not quite this structure, but it's somewhat similar. Seto beats Smokes in Clan League, I want to say, with a really fantastic move in 5 in a position somewhat like this. Maybe it was this kind of structure where I just wouldn't have considered it and it wins on the spot. So there's just threats everywhere, and it's so hard to have everything figured out that, for me, not a type of setup I'm ever going to go into. I don't see the problem with 6385 in 6, but maybe there's something really obvious there. There's also, of course, going in 8. Now, if you go in 8 with 7358, you get comboed by Malboro in 5, and I do not. Maybe there's the counter combo in 6. That's complicated. There are a lot of appealing moves. I think I'm just not going to spend the time to figure it out. We'll see what Deli does. I guess I'm predicting 6385 and 6, but maybe Akiyama can just go elsewhere, right? You don't have to go 5 immediately necessarily, because the threat of going 5 is really strong, so sometimes you can leave it open, go elsewhere, and they don't have a good way to block it. But it seems to me like maybe Deli just will have good ways to block it. I don't know. Maybe you can just go 8. Just concede. Maybe you just concede 6 and 9. You go 8, and Deli actually doesn't have a great job sweeping the top row. 1687 is going to be safe when it lands in 2. Yeah, maybe that's totally fine. Maybe that doesn't do anything. Alright, then I'm not sure what Deli's going to do. Let's see. It seems like it should be pretty promising for Deli. Okay, Deli goes 8. Now this gives up a really useful card, so you have to have figured out these endgames pretty precisely, but with 4 moves left, Deli will have done so. Has Akiyama already picked up his card? I think so, right? I did it again. What card? 1687 has been picked up. Just trying to be able to evaluate this position a bit. We'll flip over to the solver in a sec anyway. So let's see how the game played out. Very interesting start, though, right? Deli's move in 3 is quite creative. Akiyama's move in 4 is quite creative. Akiyama's move in 9 is quite creative. In terms of skepticism, I think I probably still lean Deli's movement putting 4, 8, 1, 8, and 1 over 3, but I am something of a simpleton. I like that move. I think 7, 4, 4, 7, and 4 is like probably not best or close to best, but was a quite reasonable try. 7, 5, 3, 8, and 9 I am skeptical of. And I do know the result of this game. I shouldn't pretend I don't. Deli is going to go on to win this game. So I'm assuming 7, 5, 3, 8, and 9 was losing. But that's just my guess. Because at the end, I scroll down to check the score so that I know I will have it recorded. Okay. So Akiyama puts down 1687, plays 7, 8, 2, 5, and 6. I'm going to guess he didn't miss some tie here. And Deli plays 7, 3, 5, 8, and 3, which is a neat touch at the end, because the score is currently 5, 5. And if he played 7, 3, 5, 8, for instance, in 5, he goes up 6, 4, but Akiyama has that 1, 6, 8, 7, and 2, which is safe and holds the tie. And if Deli plays 5, 7, 2, 7, and 5, he goes up 7-3, but he gets comboed by 8-1, 4-8, and 2 when he loses. So Akiyama has good coverage of 5. If Deli plays in 2 with 5-7, 2-7, capturing 3, well, 7-3, 5-8 is dead in 1. If he plays 7-3, 5-8, and 2, that doesn't even flip 3. But what he notices here, which is really nice, is that 5-7, 2-7 has the threat of a double capture in 5. So anything Akiyama does in 2 loses on the spot because he can only capture 1 card and Deli will capture 2. And if Akiyama goes in 5, he can capture with 1-6-8-7, but then Deli has a double capture, 2 beats 1. And if he goes with 8-1, 4-8, he doesn't flip anything, and Deli does. So Deli wins. Nice win for Deli. Really nice win for Deli. Very complicated game. I thought I scrolled down to give the scores, but maybe I didn't. Hey, I did, but then I scrolled back up. Why would I do that? If I scroll up, then it's so much harder in the video to find where it was. Anyway, 6-4 final score. I'm going to flip us over to the solver. I have to put in the stuff. Give me a moment. Just so we can see what was actually going on here. I never checked what the rules were. I never checked the rules. One moment while I pop open Discord and go to the game. This was for weekly open something or other. I think it was the semifinals or round 2, as it is also known. Alright. I'm gonna pause while I input stuff so you don't have to hear me babbling. Amusingly, as I've recorded this, Deli has gone on to win the finals of this, but that is not our problem. So we're going to start running this game through. Akiyama made this curious move in 4, which I think was reasonable. And my first question is, does the solver prefer 4-8, 1-8, and 1? My let's be safe instinct? Or Deli's move 4-8, 1-8, and 3? Now, the pure tie loss count isn't that indicative, so this move there are 6 ties against, which honestly, given that most moves are going to be in 5 or 8, this is actually like a fair amount of ties to be left versus a move like this. Deli's move, on the other hand, so my move gives up 6 ties. Deli's move gives up 8 ties. Now, you might think that means my move is better because it gives fewer ties. I think this is not correct. I think this means Deli's move is better. If the tie count is close, tie goes to the vaguer move where the path to that tie is going to be a lot less obvious. So I think, there are some positions where you look at, there are 2 similar moves. One gives 6 ties, one gives 8. You should usually conclude, okay, further analysis could show this wrong, but probably the 6-tie move is better. I think in a situation like this, where the moves are of quite different structural nature, then if it's at all close, you should say the vague move is probably tougher to meet, unless you think there's a really obvious path here. So I think credit to Deli for making a good and creative move. Akiyama goes in 9. My guess is this is the losing move. It is losing, but Deli only has 1 win. So for instance, my first instinct was 6-3, 8-5 here, but you can actually, you can tie by going in 8. But actually, there is a tie in 5. But it's not 1-6-8-7 there. It's 7-8-2-5. What a weird world. That's so goofy. Yeah, 1-6-8-7 just holding forward up top. All right, curious. So the 1 winning move is Deli's move. Well done to Deli. There are no ties here. Really nice game by Deli. Move in 3. Excellent move. Finding the exact win here. And here, Akiyama tries to make it a little trickier because he doesn't give some obvious way to just go in 5 and win. But Deli plays the win in 1. Really nice by Deli. So I guess the question is, what should Akiyama have done instead of 9? Is the remaining question here. So I'm going to bring the ties there up. Nah, it's getting all mixed up because I have it running move 1 and 2 as well, and the way this outputs is a little confusing there. So maybe we won't get a great answer, but let's try to come up with a plausible move and see if Monsieur Solver will accept it as a tie. So I guess my big question was, can you get away with just 8-1-4-8 here? Let's try that. This does tie. If if Akiyama, no, if Deli goes in 9, what's the best card for 9? Let's say here. Yeah, this is a tie. But Deli only has 2 ties here. He'll surely find one, but you are not losing here. Are there other moves we want to try here? I'm a bit lazy. The rest will take a while to run, so we may as well give up on it. But suffice it to say, I think the first couple moves of the game were pretty interesting. But this whole 4-3-9 sequence, nicely creative by both players, but at some point the creativity had to end, and Akiyama kept it going a little too long. I still think the move in 4 is really interesting. I think whenever you see a good player play a move that is just outside your consideration but does seem to be fine, right? You look at it and you come up with Ys, and Ys being WHYS, and you come up with, oh, this move does accomplish some things. I kind of like what this move is doing. I'm not sure it's like the best move or the position's great, but I do see what this move is doing, and I do think it's doing something good. That's not far enough to get you to ever find such moves. Because that just says, once the move is played, I can come up with reasons for it. But that does not give you, here are ways to look at the position that could lead me to finding that move. It is only explanatory, right? This is a all right. This is going to be a very stretched analogy, but many of Freud's explanations for different psychological effects say, well, if X happens, it is because of Y. If not X happens, it is because of Z. None of this is predictive. It means whether X or not X happens, he has given you an explanation. He has said this must be Y. It's never checked in any predictive sense. It never goes, okay, does this mean Y leads to X? And of course, logically, if X means Y, that doesn't mean Y means X, so that you can't like fully test it there. But because he has said, well, if this happens, I explain it. If it doesn't happen, I explain it. There's no point where he doesn't offer an explanation, but there's also no point where you can predict what it's going to be. He's not saying X leads to Y. He's saying if we see X, it must mean Y is the case. Whether or not you can actually confirm any evidence of Y, he concludes that. And if you see Y, it doesn't follow that X is the case, because Z could also be the case. I'm not saying this very cleanly to someone who's not looked at this stuff, but it's the kind of stuff where, if you tripped, it was because you were looking at your shoe. If you didn't trip, it's because you're Simone Biles. I have an explanation for everything that happens, but if none of this, no, that's said really poorly. Sorry. I'm not gonna have a good way to say this cleanly and quickly, but you really want things that aren't just explanatory. We can come up with explanations, and we need them to be able to be tested and checked. And that's going sort of scientific, but for a getting better at games thing, it's we need to be able to figure out, how can I think in a way where I can find these ideas, which is essentially, how can I think predictively of them? How can I think, if you want to be able to play moves like 7-4-4-7 and 4? Maybe you don't. Maybe you think this is not the kind of move I want to be playing. Maybe you think it's not a very good move. Totally reasonable things to think. But if you look at this move and you think, I want this to be in my lexicon of moves, and it is not currently, I want it to be an idea that comes to mind, I think sometimes this might be the right way to go, and it's not something I consider, then just coming up with an explanation for it is not good enough to get you to find this kind of move. What you need to do is figure out, what should I be looking for that could lead me to considering this type of move. And bad thinkers like Freud, offense meant, do things in a way where whatever happens, they will give you an explanation, and that will seem very complete feeling and will seem telling, and whatever comes up, ah, yes, of course, this. But the much more telling stuff is the stuff that says, if X, we will see Y, right? Or if X, we will not see not Y, right? Something like that. Something that you can test and you can verify, and you can say, okay, this really does work in this direction. This does say this. We can test this. Things should be falsifiable. If a claim is not falsifiable, if everything has an explanation and none of them are testable, it's very easy to come up with a system like this. But what charlatans will do is come up with plausible systems like this that you'll be tempted to buy into. I'm sure I've talked about this before, but it also interests me on the subject of bad thinking, and it is related to this because it's how easy it is to find things plausible and be gullible to them. Is there was a teacher teaching about a survey done of soldiers in World War II, and the soldiers were surveyed on just tons and tons of questions. So there was just this huge data mine of this massive number of soldiers talking about their experience. And this sociologist asks his university class, okay, so one of the things was there were a lot of questions asked about how comfortable people felt living in war conditions and what their backgrounds were. And so we can do these kind of cross checks where we compare one thing and see its effect, right? Or see how it connected. So, do you think that soldiers who came from rural or urban backgrounds adapted better to war life, to like trench life, right? Which was a lot of World War II living for American soldiers. And the class said various answers, and he says, okay, the answer is people from rural backgrounds adapted better. Why is that? And the class immediately supplied many reasons, more kind of hard living off the land, being used to being dirty, um, like farm life felt more analogous to trench life, stuff like that, right? And you can fill in more reasons because it's just not that hard to fill in plausible reasons. Once we know something is the case, our brains will supply explanations and we will find those believable. So then the professor goes, I was lying. In fact, urban backgrounds found it easier to adapt to life in the military and trench life. And again, we can come up with reasons. Much more comfortable being around lots of other people and having to work with lots of other people and interact with them and deal with what's going on around you in a place where lots and lots of people are packed together. And I'm sure there are other explanations you can fill in. Now, in the end, it turned out the latter was true, that soldiers from urban backgrounds did have an easier time adapting. But the point was not that. The point was that when we are told something is the case, we will come up with explanations. And without factual basis, those explanations might be right, they might be wrong, and we will find them very plausible and believable and feel like we have given understandings of the situation when we in fact have not. I mean, when he said rural soldiers from rural backgrounds adapted better, that just wasn't true. And so all the explanations people gave might have been reasons why soldiers from rural backgrounds did adapt better, or like helped them adapt, but it did not in fact add up to adapting better. We will come up with plausible things, we will be gullible to them, but we want things that are predictive. We want to be able to test our thoughts. When we just go for explanation, we do a lot of bad thinking. And it's very easy for us to fill stuff in and not test any of it and feel it's all plausible and believable. And this may seem very abstract for strategic game thinking, but I think it is relevant because, I mean, I'm just making this point over and over, but if you see a move and you want it to be the kind of move you find, giving it some explanation can help. But much more useful is, what can I be looking for that leads me to it, not what does seem strong to me about this move after the fact? How can I change my thinking rather than just give an explanation after it has happened? Will be a much more reliable way to lead you to a type of move you want to play more of. I should say at the end, maybe you don't want to play more of this type of move though. Just because a really strong player makes a move, and just because that move is in fact fine or good, does not mean you should be looking to play it more. Because one of the other challenges of Triple Triad is you do not have infinite time. If you were playing Correspondence Triple Triad, as that Czech website did, then you should probably be trying to consider just about everything as deeply as you can, and that's going to be good training for coming up with reasons to find lots of different moves. But if you are playing in a time constrained format of 3, 5, 7 minutes, you want to figure out how to use your time as efficiently as possible. And I think, for instance, one of the main differences between Deli and I, as an example, is he throws a wider net of candidate moves. We will consider basically any move I consider, it is very likely that Deli also consider. But Deli is likely to consider other moves in addition. This isn't always the case, this is a little simplified. But if I see 3 plausible moves to consider, there's some chance Deli sees just the same 3, but there's also a chance he sees 4, 5, or 6. Let's say he sees 5 moves for every 3 moves I see. That's going to mean if the best options are in those 4th and 5th moves, in fact, the move on the board, 4, 8, 1, 8, and 3, could be counted as one of these situations, then he's going to play the better move, or at least have a chance to play the better move. But if the moves take a lot of time to think through, I'm going to be able to spend more of my time on the 3 that have the best chance to work, and Deli is going to have more diluted use of his time. He's not going to be able to spend quite as much on what are potentially likely to be the key moves. But also, if none of those standard moves are, Deli's going to have the much better chance to find the unusual plan. And so there's a trade-off here. There is a, do you want to throw your candidate move net wider, but not be able to spend as much time on each move? Or do you want to keep it narrower, potentially miss important and useful ideas, but really make sure you get the moves you're checking checked thoroughly and well? And there's not some clear answer of where to go there, but when you see a move type you didn't consider, there is the question, is this important enough that I should change my thinking to make this high enough up on my hierarchy list that I should be considering it in game? Or do I like that there are other things I consider and I'm not going to have time to get to this, and I think that's right. You can very reasonably conclude either way. For me, my instinct is something like you want enough heuristics that you will get to a reasonable move. So, maybe in most positions there are only 3 normal moves you consider, but all those moves have a reasonable chance to be good, and probably 1 or 2 of them are good, and that's going to be sufficient. In positions where none of those moves are good, what can you do that helps you move off them quickly? And what are heuristics that will then let you hone in on what other options might be appealing? So, like, Deli's move 4, 8, 1, 8, and 3 here, I'm never going to play, because I'm going to think 4, 8, 1, 8, and 1 is sufficient, and I'm not going to look further. And Deli is, and he's going to make the better move here. I think this is just true. I'm not sure how much a better move it is. Again, my move technically gives fewer ties. I do think Deli's move is very likely better, especially because it went on to win this game. I'm not sure how much better, but like, suffice it to say, he is going to make the better move here, and he's going to make the better move because I am going to be satisfied, and he is going to look further. But if this move didn't work, 3 is kind of the next square I look, right? I did it again. I get to 3 if 1 and 8 do not work for me. and I've dismissed 2 quickly just because the combo chain doesn't work the right way. I'm going to end up in 3 next there. So if I didn't like this move in 1, I may well end up on his move in 3. He ends up on it either way, or he can consider it either way. I only get there if I have dismissed my standard options. And I think this is an interesting distinction of players. Sorry I talk so much about differences between myself and Deli, but I think there are a lot of positions we talk about where we just immediately list the same moves, and then when you look at our games, we play fairly differently, even though we're mostly checking the same things and we're mostly evaluating the same things. There are still big differences in play, and I find that really interesting. And I think both of us are doing something really good and defensible. And it's not obvious which is preferable, but I think the distinction's really interesting and figuring out where you want to be on that distinction. And I think the easiest way to get good is to do a narrow search deeply. But that relies on being a good calculator. And if you don't have a brain that calculates particularly efficiently, then maybe that's not the clear path. Now, Deli is obviously a very good calculator, but my point, I guess, is I think Deli essentially does the harder way, right? Deli takes in a lot more information and tries to deal with all of it. And I think that's really difficult and really neat. And this was a very nicely won game by him. We didn't do too much analysis here, but finding the only win here is tricky. 8 really does seem to, in a lot of situations, be the key square here. So while there are many squares that can be valuable, again, the turd stuff game comes to mind. Do spend sufficient time checking 8 in these setups. That's another thing where a triple triad becomes more like chess. Coming to understand certain types of structures and just where to look first in each of them. Really useful triple triad skill. Okay, I've babbled long enough. This has been very long. Apologies for that. If you made it through this video, congratulations to you, I guess. I don't know.